I caught her before she hit the ground. That's the first thing I remember. The sound of my front door flying open, the rush of cold November air, and then my sister's weight collapsing against me like every bit of strength she'd ever had just gave out at once. I grabbed her arms, pulled her in, and when I finally saw her face under the porch light, my stomach dropped. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. There was a cut above her eyebrow that had dried but never been cleaned. She was wearing a long-sleeve shirt in 40-degree weather, and I already knew why. Who did this? I asked, even though I already knew. She didn't answer. She just started crying. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying you see in movies. The quiet kind. The kind that sounds like someone who has been doing it alone for a very long time. I brought her inside, sat her on my couch, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and made her tea. She wouldn't drink. I sat across from her and I waited. I had learned, over the past 2 years, that pushing my sister never worked. She had to come to it herself. She had to find the words in her own time. It took about 20 minutes. "It was Derek," she finally said. Of course it was Derek. My sister, I'll call her Claire, had married Derek 14 months earlier in a small ceremony outside of Raleigh. I had been her maid of honor. I had stood up there in a dusty rose dress and smiled and cried the right kind of tears, because that's what you do for your sister on her wedding day. I had toasted to their happiness. I had meant it. Derek seemed fine at first. He was tall, good-looking, worked in insurance, coached youth baseball on weekends. He laughed easily and always offered to help clear the table. He called our mother ma'am. He was the kind of man that everyone liked immediately and no one thought to look at twice. I looked at him twice. There was something in the way he watched Claire when she was talking to other people, not lovingly, possessively, like she was something he owned and was monitoring for damage. I noticed it at their engagement party when she laughed too hard at a story our cousin was telling, and Derek's jaw tightened just slightly. I noticed it again at Thanksgiving when she mentioned she was thinking about going back to finish her degree, and he said, very calmly, "We've already talked about that," and changed the subject. I mentioned it to my mother once. She told me I was being overprotective. Maybe I was. Claire seemed happy, or she said she was, and I wanted to believe her. She was my little sister, younger than me by 3 years, and I had spent most of our childhood looking out for her. Old habit. Hard to turn off. So, I watched, and I worried quietly, and I told myself I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. The first time she showed up at my door with bruises was 8 months into their marriage. She said she'd fallen down the stairs. I didn't believe her. I told her I didn't believe her. She got upset, told me I was making things worse, and left. We didn't talk for 3 weeks. The second time was 6 months after that. A bruised rib she explained away as a car door. She stayed for dinner, hugged me at the door, told me she was fine. This, tonight, was the 3rd time. And this time, she didn't have an explanation ready. She just had the truth. "He came home in a bad mood," she said, staring at her hands. "I'd made the wrong thing for dinner. I know that sounds stupid." "It doesn't sound stupid," I said. "It sounds like he's been hurting you." She flinched at the word. People always do, the first time someone says it out loud. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. "Almost since the beginning." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise. I had been afraid of this answer for over a year. But hearing it still hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. I thought about her wedding day. The dusty rose dress. The toast I had given about love being a safe harbor. I thought about all the times I had talked myself out of trusting my own instincts. "Have you thought about leaving?" I asked. She laughed. A short, humorless sound. "I don't have anywhere to go." "You have here." "He knows where you live, Megan." She said my name like it settled the argument. And the terrible thing was, in that moment, it almost did. Because she was right. She couldn't stay with me permanently. Derek would come here. He would make a scene. He would call it a misunderstanding and bring flowers and say all the right things, and she would go back with him, and then things would get worse. And the next time she showed up at my door, maybe she wouldn't be able to get up off the ground. I had seen how this went. Not personally, but professionally. I need to tell you something about myself because it matters to the rest of this story. I'm a detective with the Raleigh Police Department. I have been for 4 years. Before that, I spent 2 years as a patrol officer. And before that, I studied criminal justice at NC State on an academic scholarship. I am 31 years old. I run 6 miles 3 times a week, and I've spent the better part of my career watching what happens to women who stay in dangerous situations and don't get help in time. I have knocked on doors. I have made the notifications. I have sat with children in the back seats of police cars and tried to explain things that have no good explanation. I was not going to let that happen to my sister. But I also knew that I couldn't just show up at Derek's door in an official capacity based on what Claire had told me tonight. She hadn't filed a report. She wasn't ready to. And as much as that frustrated me, I understood it. Victims of domestic violence stay an average of 7 times before leaving for good. The trauma bonding is real. The fear is real. The financial dependency is real. Derek controlled their joint accounts. Claire had no credit card in her own name, no savings he didn't have access to. She had been slowly, methodically cut off from every resource that would have made leaving easier. He had done it so gradually she hadn't even noticed until it was done. That night I made up the couch and sat on the edge while she fell asleep. I watched her breathing even out. I watched the tension in her face slowly soften, and I sat there in the dark and I thought about what I actually could do. By morning, I had a plan. I need you to trust me, I told her over coffee. And I need you to go home. She looked at me like I had slapped her. I know how that sounds, I said. Just listen. I explained it to her carefully. I told her that what I was going to do required her to go back, to act normal, to give me 72 hours. I told her I needed her to text me a code word if things escalated before then. I told her exactly what I was going to do. Not all of it, but enough. She was scared. She was also exhausted and out of options, and she knew me well enough to know I didn't say things I didn't mean. 72 hours, she said. 72 hours, I said, and then this is over. She went home. I went to work. The first thing I did was call in a favor from a colleague in our domestic violence unit, a woman named Sandra who had been working these cases for 11 years and had the kind of quiet, iron competence that I have always deeply admired. I told her the situation, not the plan, just the situation. She pulled Derek's name, and within an hour we had something interesting. A prior incident, different county, different woman, 7 years ago. A girlfriend who had filed a report and then withdrawn it 2 weeks later. No charges. But the record existed, and Sandra knew how to read what wasn't written down as clearly as what was. He's done this before, she said. They almost always have. I already knew that. But having it confirmed made the next step easier to take. The second thing I did was reach out to a victim's advocate I trusted and started quietly setting up what Claire would need when she was ready. A bank account in her name only, a contact at a shelter outside the county who could take her in with no connection to Derek, and documentation of the medical records from her last ER visit 6 months ago, when she'd gone in for what she told them was a rib injured in a fall. Falls. Car doors. Stairs. I had seen that paperwork before. I knew what the pattern looked like. The third thing I did was the part I hadn't told Claire about. On the second evening, I drove to their neighborhood and parked 2 streets over. I knew Derek's schedule because Claire had, over many months and without realizing it, given me an extremely detailed picture of their daily life. He left for work at 7:40. He went to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. He was in a fantasy football league that met at a bar on Wednesday nights, and he was always home by 10:15. It was a Wednesday. 8:47 p.m. I was not there in an official capacity. I was there as a sister. I want to be honest about that. I want to be honest about all of it. I had my personal vehicle, not a department car. I was in jeans and a dark jacket. I had my badge on me because I never go anywhere without it, but I was not acting as a detective. I was acting as a woman who had watched her sister get hurt one too many times and had decided that waiting for the official machinery to grind forward at its own pace was no longer acceptable. I let myself into their backyard through the side gate. Claire had given me a key years ago for plant watering purposes, and Derek had never thought to change the locks, because he was the kind of man who never imagined anyone would move against him. That was his first mistake. I set up a small wireless camera on the back porch, angled toward the kitchen window where the light was good. State-of-the-art, motion-activated, stores footage directly to a cloud account that Derek could never access. The kind of equipment I knew about from work and had purchased with my own money 3 days earlier. His second mistake was coming home early. I heard the car in the driveway at 9:22, which was nearly an hour ahead of schedule. I had just finished adjusting the camera angle. I pressed myself against the side of the house in the shadows, and I waited, completely still, while he walked up the front path and went inside. I heard his voice through the window. Low, controlled, the tone that precedes the explosion. I had learned to recognize it from 100 interviews with 100 women who all described the same thing, that eerie quiet right before. Then Claire's voice, nervous, trying to smooth something over. Then his voice again, louder. I didn't move. I needed footage, not intervention, not yet. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to go through that door, but I held. Then I heard something break, and then I heard my sister cry out. I was through the back door in 4 seconds. Derek was in the kitchen. He had his back to me when I came in, which was lucky for both of us, because it gave me 2 extra seconds to assess the situation before he knew I was there. Claire was against the far counter, holding her wrist, her face white. A ceramic mug was in pieces on the floor between them. He turned around when he heard the door. I have thought a lot about what I want to say about the next few minutes, and I've decided to say it plainly. I am a trained law enforcement officer. I know how to use my body in situations involving physical confrontation. I know how to control a scene, how to manage an aggressive subject, how to end something quickly and with the minimum necessary force. Derek was 6 feet tall and approximately 200 pounds. I am 5 feet 8 inches and I have been in defensive tactics training since I was 23 years old. The confrontation lasted less time than you might expect. He was on the floor, zip-tied. Yes, I had come prepared, before he fully processed what was happening. I identified myself by name and told him very clearly that he was going to stay exactly where he was. I was not there as a police officer. I was there as Claire's sister. And I told him, in terms I want to believe he understood, exactly what was going to happen next. I told him that everything that had just occurred was on camera. The mug, Claire's wrist, his voice, all of it. I told him that I had documentation going back months. I told him about the prior incident in the other county because I wanted him to understand that he was not as invisible as he believed himself to be. And then I asked him a question. What do you think happens now? He didn't answer. He was looking at the floor. I told him anyway. Claire was going to leave tonight. She was going to take what she needed. He was not going to follow her, contact her, or use any financial mechanism to pressure her. He was not going to tell their friends a version of events that painted him as a victim. He was not going to make this harder than it had to be. Because if he did, if he made even one move that looked like harassment or retaliation, everything I had collected would go to the DA's office, to the detective in the county where his previous girlfriend had filed her report, and to the sports league where he coached 12-year-olds on weekends. I let that last part land. I watched his face. He understood. I cut the zip tie and told him to sit in the living room. He did. Some people, when they are finally, clearly, unambiguously confronted, when someone removes the comfortable fiction that they are untouchable, simply deflate, Like there was nothing inside them all along except borrowed confidence and the fear of other people. That's what Derek did. He deflated. Claire and I were in and out of that house in 40 minutes. She took her documents, her medications, the box of photos she kept under the bed, and the small jar of cash she had been secretly accumulating for 3 months without telling me about it. $37 in ones and quarters. She had been saving it, she told me later, for no reason she could name. Some part of her, buried under all the fear and conditioning, had been preparing to leave even before she knew she was. She cried the whole drive to my apartment, not the quiet kind this time. The other kind. The loud, shaking, almost violent kind of crying that means something is finally coming loose. I let her cry. I didn't tell her it was going to be okay immediately, because that's not what people need to hear in the first hour. I just drove, and I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on her shoulder, and I said, "I've got you." And I meant it in the most literal possible way. She stayed on my couch for 2 weeks. Then she moved into the place Sandra's contact had arranged, a quiet apartment in a complex that didn't accept mail under residents' names, that had a security door code that changed every month, where several other women in similar situations had rebuilt their lives in increments, slowly and on their own terms. Derek did not follow. Derek did not call. Derek did, 6 weeks later, receive formal notice from an attorney because by then Claire was ready to file. There were legal proceedings. There were difficult days. There was a morning when she called me at 6 a.m. saying she was thinking about withdrawing the petition, and I sat on the phone with her for 2 hours and talked her through it. Not by telling her what to do, but by asking her what she actually wanted her life to look like in 5 years. She described it to me, haltingly, and then she heard herself describing it and she said, Okay. I know what I need to do. She didn't withdraw the petition. The divorce was finalized 4 months after she left. I want to tell you something about that day, because it's the part of the story that I go back to the most. Claire called me when it was done. She was standing outside the courthouse in downtown Raleigh, and she said my name, and then she said, "It's over." Just those 2 words. And I could hear something in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. A lightness. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But the particular sound of a person who has put down something very heavy and is just beginning to understand what it feels like to use their hands for something else. I drove to the courthouse. We went to lunch at a diner we used to go to when we were in college. She ordered the French toast, which she hadn't ordered in years because Derek had once made a comment about the sugar content. She ate every bite. There is something I think about when I tell this story, and I've thought carefully about whether to say it because I know some people will disagree with me. What I did that night was not by the book. I know that. I bent rules. I was not operating in my official capacity, and I used my professional knowledge in a way that existed in a gray area I am not entirely comfortable describing. I have colleagues who would have handled it differently. I have colleagues who have told me after the fact that I got lucky. Maybe I did. But I also know what happens in the cases where no one goes through the back door. I know what the alternative timeline looks like. I have worked those cases. I have sat with those families. I have seen what waiting for the right moment costs when the wrong moment arrives first. I am not telling you to do what I did. I am not telling you that personal intervention is the answer or that the system is too broken to bother with. The system matters. Reporting matters. Sandra and her unit, and the advocates and the attorneys and the shelters, all of it matters. And none of it gets enough funding or credit. What I am telling you is that my sister is alive. She has a job now, a small apartment with plants on every windowsill, a rescue dog named Biscuit who sleeps at the foot of her bed. She is finishing the degree she put on hold when Derek told her they'd already talked about it. She laughs the right kind of laugh now, the kind that doesn't make anyone's jaw tighten. She called me last Tuesday just to talk. No crisis, no fear in her voice, just to talk. We were on the phone for an hour and a half about nothing in particular, and when we hung up, I sat in my car in the parking garage outside the precinct, and I just breathed for a minute. That's the part they don't tell you about. The recovery, which is slower and quieter and less dramatic than the rescue, but which is, in every way that actually matters, the whole point. She sent me a card in December, a few months after everything was settled. A plain card with a bird on the front, a wren or a sparrow, small and plain and somehow just right. Inside, she had written 4 sentences. I'm not going to share all of them. They were hers to say and mine to keep, but the last line was this: "You came through the back door when I didn't even know I'd left it unlocked." I have that card in the drawer of my nightstand. I have looked at it on hard days, on days when the job is heavy and the cases pile up, and the world feels like it's made entirely of preventable tragedies. It reminds me why I do this work. Not just the official work, all of it. The work of showing up. The work of not looking away. The work of sitting with someone in the dark and staying there until the light comes. My sister left that house with $37 in a jar and the clothes on her back, and somehow, more courage than I have ever seen in any person in my life, I just helped her find the door.